website is joeingramlaw.com. Our phone number is 205-335-2640. If you have questions, please submit those to us, and we will take care of those off the air and get back to you as needed. Our conversation tonight is a interesting topic. There's been a lot of these cases in the last 25 or 30 years of litigation. It is a police brutality and excessive force case that I filed 20 years ago, my first year of practice. We're going to have a guest tonight to help narrate our show and ask questions along. He's been with us before. So, Paul, are you with us?
Well, good evening, Joe. I am with you. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you for taking the time to do this with us tonight, Paul.
My distinct pleasure.
Okay. So, as I was sharing with the audience, 20 years ago when I was in law school, I found some materials related to police brutality and excessive force cases. And I was intrigued and interested by it because those cases were starting to be relevant, come in the news, and starting to get some track in federal court. So I did some research. And as a matter of fact, my first year practicing law, I represented an individual against a local police department. I will not say the municipality. And we filed a case against the city and 3 officers for excessive force.
So what was the kind of the story and the background of the allegation of excessive force?
Well, the way this case started, my client was a young man. He was drunk. He was driving impaired. In fact, I believe he may have hit a stop sign and passed out behind the wheel of the car. And he was taken to a local police station late at night. Young man, never been in trouble with the law before, and he was scared. He didn't know what to do. And the main agitator in this case, the main police officer of the excessive force case, said, you better strip or we're going to strip you. And he was scared. And he said, I'm not taking my clothes off. Now, there's some really key elements here that are relevant to case law now that have developed over the last 20 years. He was handcuffed in a booking room. There was a camera in the corner of the booking room. And they started hitting him with police batons many times about his legs. And to the point, I can't remember the number of strikes, so I'm not gonna say a number. But when he got out of jail and came to see me the following Monday, he could not put on a pair of blue jeans because his legs had swollen from the fluid and the bruising in his legs. So that's how the case started.
So were you able to review that video footage during discovery?
So that is the $1 million piece of information in this case. And we will get there. So he tells me the story, how he got arrested, DUI. He tells me about what happened in the booking room. You know, first year lawyer, I really didn't believe the story. And he says, Mr. Ingram, there was a video camera in the room. And I thought, surely not. that there is a tape of this. And there was. And it took us a long time to get to see that tape. In fact, it took us a year. I represented him in the criminal case for the DUI. They denied that it existed at that point in time. We filed a federal lawsuit against the city and the officers individually and in their official capacity. And so we go to the motion to dismiss hearing after I file my complaint. And I draw one of the most conservative federal judges on the bench at that time. Now, he is deceased now, by the way. And he looks at me, as young as I am, green behind the ears. And he says, Mr. Ingram, if I dismiss your case, are you going to appeal me to the 11th Circuit? And I was so green, I didn't know what to say back to a federal judge. And that's how the federal litigation case started. We filed a complaint. We went to a motion to dismiss hearing. And guess what? The federal judge dismissed my lawsuit right after I filed it.
And why was that? Why did he move to dismiss?
Well, every judge has, their own tendencies, biases, persuasions. I just don't think he thought much of the lawsuit because, one, I didn't have the tape, so I couldn't allege a lot of the facts in the complaint. It was a bare bones complaint. And I just don't think he really believed it. People have a tendency to want to believe police officers. Now, I say this in all candor with what I do. I have absolute respect for police officers. I think they have a very important job. They have a very tough job. But they also have to follow the law. And I think from his perspective, he just didn't think there was a case there. So the judge dismisses my case. I go back to my office. I'm very disappointed, distraught, wondering what I'm going to do for my client, first-year lawyer. And then I get a call from the defense lawyer, who is an insurance lawyer who represents the city. And he really does me a favor. He says, Joe, how are you? And I say, hello, Mr. Insurance Lawyer. How are you today? And he says, why are you so down in your cup? And I said, well, you just won today. You beat the pants off of me. The judge dismissed my federal lawsuit. I'm done. And he laughs. And he says, Joe, all you got to do is file an appeal to the 11th Circuit of Appeals in Atlanta, and we'll go to the appellate court with this case. Now, I was a first-year lawyer. I had never filed a federal appeal. I was getting in way over my head. I was learning trial by fire, learning on the job as we speak, minute by minute. But I did file an appeal to the 11th Circuit, and that is when we got some relief. The 11th Circuit has a rule in cases like this. Before you have to file a paper brief, they will give you an option for a mediator. And in this case, they said, would you like a mediator? Mr. Insurance Company knew about the tape, which I still have been asking for almost a year. And I said, I will go to mediation if I can see the tape. And so we meet, and I get to finally see the booking tape. It exists. And it is sad. It is outrageous. It's disappointing. And the tape speaks for itself.
Now, paint us a little picture. With what you saw on the tape, was the young fellow, was he passively or actively resisting the officer's attempts to help him disrobe?
He was intoxicated. He was not fighting back. He was just being beaten, laying on the ground in this booking room floor, on a concrete floor, with his hands cuffed. He was defenseless. And
so that would not meet the objective reasonableness standard that most law enforcement have to look through while determining if their use of force is appropriate based on the totality of circumstances. In that context, did you also look at other aspects of, say, the officer's training or the standard operating procedures of the department with their rules on use of force?
well, not in that particular case, because that was my first one. Now, I've done 3 excessive force police brutality cases, and I've learned from each one of those. And by the time I did the second one, we asked for the police manual and handbook on their training. On the first case, I did not do that. The key that saved me in this case is the tape that spoke for itself, that was so overwhelming that when the mediator looked at it with us in the room, he said, "What's the number?" That's all it took. I mean, we were there less than an hour and a half that day. And we settled the case for my client. Now, it wasn't a Rodney King case. It wasn't 7 figures. It didn't change his life, but he was adequately compensated for the behavior and actions of the police officers, and one in particular. By the way, the whole thing that really made me happy, when you go to law school, you want to do justice, you want to make a difference. I made a difference in one case because I got that officer dismissed from the police force based upon his actions. Turns out they had a number of complaints with him, and this was the final straw that broke the camel's back that got him dismissed. So that gave me hope my first year practicing law, that I had made some difference in somebody's life.
And what is the case law from the Fifth Amendment about reasonable use of force that people always point to when they are looking for maybe signs of police brutality or excessive use of force?
Well, you're only supposed to use as much force that is needed for the person to comply. There are now, after I've done a couple of these cases, there are particular rules, such as if you mace someone in the eyes, you are supposed to get them medical treatment after they are maced. That does not mean you take them to the water fountain. That means you're supposed to get them medical treatment if they're maced. You're not supposed to mace someone if they're handcuffed, by the way. So you're only supposed to use as much force as needed to make the person comply and behave or comply with the orders of the police officer. I always tell my clients, comply with the order. If they tell you to get down, put your hands behind your back. Now, we have some tools today that we didn't have 20 years ago. And you know this from your training. Police officers have body cameras. I think that's a good tool. I think it benefits both the police officers and the potential defendants. We have the dash cam videos that just came into existence probably 25, 30 years ago. So the technology is there, and I think it benefits everybody. If you're doing the right thing, you shouldn't care that you're wearing a body camera video.
No, and we know that living in today's date and time, that everyone is constantly recording everything that you're doing as a law enforcement officer. And it's wise to have your own point of view recorded also. It gives it more circumspect perspective of everything that may be happening. And I think it can also help if you have that body camera, because the other person, your subject that you might be interacting with, knows that they are also being recorded. I think it just kind of helps keep honest people honest. So can you tell me a little bit about the background of the Supreme Court decision, Graham versus Connor,
Paul,
for the audience? So yes, a lot of our law enforcement training and policies instruct our officers to use the minimum amount of force necessary to gain compliance. And this is why we spend such a large amount of time talking about the use of force continuum, which includes everything from just the officer's presence, he or she being there in uniform as a symbol of legal authority, to using verbal commands, to then using soft hands, hard hands, and then what we call less lethal or non-lethal weapons, moving all the way to lethal force. And the goal is to use that minimum amount of force necessary to gain compliance. And under the best of circumstances, we are hoping to train people to use their verbal skills to gain voluntary compliance and avoid any type of use of force at all. And like you said, there's many more tools available now than there was 30 years ago. And the more opportunities that you have to solve the problem in different ways can reduce use of excessive force or resulting in serious bodily harm or injury, and can create more of a safe environment for both the officer and the subject. I think there's a lot of complexity that goes into how do we properly train and equip officers.
And we didn't talk about it tonight, but your background is in police training as an officer. From your perspective, does it bother you having that body cam video on, or are you in? Is it almost like you appreciate it being there to tell the story for you from your perspective? When you're put in that position?
Absolutely. I think of it almost as a security blanket. It does a couple different things. It records an objective perspective from my point of view. It also, I think, may have a ability to de-escalate sometimes when you are dealing with an irritated or aggravated individual, that they may see that that camera is on, and they may choose not to do or say certain things that they might be inclined to do if you did not have a way to record what the interaction was. And I'm always of the belief that we are constantly being recorded when we're in public because, of course, we have no expectation of privacy. And it's also, why would we not want to use that same tool? And there's a lot of complexities with getting the cameras into the right hands. And then there's a lot of policies that go into implementing those and the storage. But I see nothing but positives and benefits leading from kind of the common ubiquity of police body cameras.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's a little bit of war stories about police brutality, excessive force cases. For our audience tonight, I told them the first time you were with us, we had a couple stories to share. What story you want to talk about tonight with the audience?
Well, I was talking to one of my friends at work today, and we were thinking about, hey, the weather's getting nice, and what type of things are we going to do this spring? And we got talking about kayaking. And I was thinking, what a wonderful time you and I had paddling down that river. I believe it was in September or October, a couple of years back. And you really weren't kind of keen on the idea of kayaking or canoeing. But since you're always a real good sport and you're always trying new things, I think once we got on the river, you kind of enjoyed it. And I was just thinking about, that was a pretty good trip. What did you think about that?
If you don't remember, it was my position. I wanted us to do a canoe where we were in the same boat. And then the gentleman that was taking us down to the, I don't know what you call it, the point where they dropped you off at the Coosa River. He told us not to do the canoe, to do, what did we do? Single person kayaks? Is that what they call it?
Yes, we did the individual sit on top kayaks. Do you remember the nickname he had for 2-person canoes?
No, I don't.
The divorce maker. I.e., yeah, because you'd be paddling down maybe with your spouse or loved one, and one of you ends up dumping both of you in the water, and that was a cause for some, I guess, relationship conflicts. So he encouraged all of his clients up there really away from getting the 2-person canoe or the kayak. And he said it also just becomes the bathtub, which
right.
We got a lot of splash over on the river, and I could see having like an enclosed kayak or canoe would just take on water.
Yeah. That was a very adventurous day for me. I enjoyed it. I really did. I don't think I'll do it again.
Well, I was just going to ask you if you wanted to go in this spring. No. Okay.
Well. No, Paul. For the audience, they may or may not be aware. It's called Coosa Adventures, I believe.
Yep, Coosa River Adventures. I would highly recommend it. It's the most fun you can have under $40.
Yeah, and is there 2 or 3 sections of sort of like mini rapids? Would you say? Was there?
Yeah, they are a little spicy. They're not anything that would require like professional Olympic skill. But if you do get turned a little bit sideways, you might dump over. I think we had mixed success a couple times. We went down with no problem at all. But there's little kids that do it, and I don't know. I think it would be okay for amateurs.
Do you remember when our guide that took us down to drop us off was telling us about? Didn't we have to wear a helmet?
Yes.
Yeah. And he was talking about being careful to not put your foot out that you'd break your ankle and all these things. And I kept looking at you and I was thinking, what in the hell have I got myself into?
Right. And I was thinking to myself, look, I need to pull Joe aside and tell him, look, he's just giving us the scary talk, probably for his own liability. It can't be this bad, because you were shooting daggers at me like, what the heck did you drag me into? And then I was thinking, well, if something bad does happen, I've never been on this river before. How am I going to explain this to your wife?
And just so the audience knows, I did flip over, and I did go into a panic because I got stuck under the kayak and thought I was going to drown. And that changed my life there for about 10 seconds. It got really fast for me. That was, I remember that moment.
Well,
I
you
will
played
never.
it off like a champ because you crawled right back into that kayak. I think the only way you were worse for the wear at the end of that day was a mild sunburn.
Yeah. But like you said, for no more than we spent, what it take probably 5, 6 hours to do that.
I think they said if you paddled real fast, you could do it in two, and if you slowed down, it would be you could stretch it to about 4 hours. I think we were about at the 3.5 hour mark, but when you account for the time it took to do all the transportation to and from on the front and back ends, I think we were there for about 5.5 or 6 hours total on that day. It was beautiful
That
weather.
it was beautiful weather, and it was a great Sunday afternoon, and it's one of the best memories I've had in the last 3 years prior to COVID. Um, I just I don't know that I have the desire to jump back on the kayak again. Um,
Well, I will try to wear you down a little bit. Maybe you'll acquiesce, and then we'll have another fun kayaking story for the audience.
okay. So before we go, Paul, we appreciate your time. Is there anything that you appreciate Paul being a guest? Um, our website is joeingramlaw.com. Our phone number is 205-335-2640. We are always available to take your questions. We represent people in criminal cases throughout the state and family law matters as well. I will say this with a caveat. I did 3 police brutality cases. Swore I would never take another one. But after this podcast tonight, I am of the opinion that if the right case came along, I could be persuaded to take another shot at the apple if it's a good case. And it has to be a really good case to take against a police department and a city. So, with that, we will end the show. And as we always say, take care of yourself and each other and have a good night. No representation is made that the quality of the legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by other lawyers.